Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to this week's Q&A. As always, thank you so much for your questions. And also, as always, if you have any new questions this week, just go ahead and post them on the bottom of this Patreon post. Also, if you asked a question in the past that still hasn't been answered yet, you can go ahead and copy and paste that onto the bottom of this post as well. And also, please don't forget to like all the comments that you want answered because I generally answer the questions in order of how many likes they have. So with that out of the way, let's get started. So I asks, what are some signs you think point to language learning being a bad use of time? In other words, how would someone know to stop learning a language? Well, first of all, if you're asking about what is a bad use of time versus a good use of time, really that's a very deep philosophical question that's been debated among philosophers for hundreds and thousands of years, and no one seems to have reached a real consensus on that yet. So ultimately, I don't think there is any straightforward answer. I mean, really, I think that all notions of good and bad are completely relative, and it all depends on whatever perspective you happen to be looking through or whatever paradigm you happen to be working from. So, like for example, you could take a utilitarian lens, and if that's the view that you're looking at reality through, then that tells you that something is good if it leads to greater happiness for all people involved, and something is bad if it leads to less happiness for all involved. So then you could think about it from that lens. Is you learning a language going to lead to the greatest happiness of all? And is it going to do that in the most efficient way possible? Even if you learning a language is going to lead to the greatest amount of happiness for everyone involved, is that the most efficient way to optimize happiness for all? Or is there a different way that you could use your time that would lead to even more happiness? So I don't actually generally view the world through this particular lens of utilitarianism, but that was just one example. And if you actually take an ethics class in college, for example, they'll tell you that different philosophers throughout history have had different theories regarding what is good, what is bad, and no one can agree. And they're all completely different, and ultimately they're all arbitrary. So your question is kind of loaded. I can't tell you that. And also, like, when you're learning a language, you could be learning a language for so many different reasons, right? You could be doing it because the languages that you already speak are, only spoken in cultures or in countries that right now don't present a lot of financial opportunities. And so you're learning a new language that will allow you to move to a different country where you can have more financial opportunities to feed your family and so on. That could be one reason. That would be pretty easy to say that it's a good use of time. Or maybe you already speak a language that affords you plenty of financial opportunities, but you just have an intrinsic interest in a foreign language or a foreign culture or country, and you're just doing it out of passion. Well, if you value passion, then probably you can justify that as being a good use of time. And there's also this idea that learning a foreign language is inherently enriching and a good way to just grow yourself as a person, widen your perspective. And so if those are all things that you value, then you could say that learning a language is a good use of your time. But really, we'd have to, if we wanted to get to the bottom of this whole thing about is it a good use of time or not, then we'd have to talk about, assuming that learning a foreign language does grow your perspective, is that a good thing? Yes or no? Is it inherently desirable? And of course, a lot of people would just say, yeah, of course it is. But when you really think about it, well, what makes it so desirable? And you might say, growing your perspective is desirable because it helps you empathize with other people from different cultures better. But then why is that a good thing? And so you could just chase this down forever almost. And it's really hard to get to the bottom of why does anything matter at all? Unless you believe in some external God, and then in which case it comes down to, well, how do you know that God exists? And it gets very philosophical very quickly, as you can see. But I'm guessing that that's not what you guys want to hear. I'm guessing that this question has the most upvotes because I talk a lot about how I feel like I learned Japanese for the wrong reasons, and maybe it wasn't the best use of my time and things like that. And also I talked in the last Q&A about how I have this struggle where I don't know if I want to go forward with having Japanese be a big part of my life, or move in the direction of more letting it go and just taking my life in an entirely new direction. And I go back and forth on that. And so, yeah, I'm guessing you guys want to hear some more down-to-earth, kind of practical, pragmatic ideas from me on this. And I think maybe one simple thing I could say is that wherever you want to go with your life, whatever life you want to hopefully have in the future, if you come to some point where you feel that investing your time in continuing to learn whatever language you've been learning isn't the most direct path to you achieving the life that you want to live, then it's probably not a good use of your time, right? And I guess this is where sunk cost bias would come in, because a lot of times if you invest a lot of time and effort and resources into a given endeavor, you become attached to that endeavor, and it's hard for you to think objectively about whether or not continuing with that endeavor is really your best option or not. And I know that I've definitely struggled with this with Japanese, but for example, let's say that you've been learning Korean for 2 years and you're not quite fluent, but you're getting close, but now you're having doubts about whether or not continuing spending so much time and effort learning Korean is really a good option or not. And part of the reasoning that's probably going to come up in your mind is, oh, well, I've already spent 2 whole years learning Korean and I'm so close. So if I threw that all out now, that would be a huge waste. And so therefore, I should continue learning it. What you have to remember is that if you really have no interest in the Korean language or Korean culture, and in your heart of hearts, moving in that direction is not what you want to do, then it doesn't matter that you're almost fluent in Korean. All that matters is what you're going to do in the future, because the past is already gone. And so if you're not interested in Korean now, then it really doesn't matter that you're fluent in Korean. And so spending additional time learning Korean might actually be a bad use of time for you subjectively, because it's not moving you closer to having the life that you want to live. And for me, it helped me kind of see this principle when I thought about half Japanese people, or just Japanese people who grew up in the United States and are therefore fluent in both Japanese and English. A lot of times these people are not very interested in Japanese. Like, it's their heritage, and maybe their parents speak it and their grandparents speak it and so on, and they're completely fluent in the language because maybe their parents forced them to go to Sunday school where they learned how to read Japanese or whatever. But to them, they might have just they might just think of Japanese as a giant chore, and they might have hated going to the Sunday school. And as soon as they go to college, they completely stop using Japanese and slowly forget it, because to them, it just doesn't mean anything. And so looking at those people, it's easy to see that maybe there's no inherent value in language ability. It only has the value that you give it. And of course, there's a lot of things you can do with language ability, but if you don't value those things, then it doesn't mean anything, right? Like, so yeah, you can translate if you speak 2 languages, and you can expose yourself to a larger variety of media and opinions and thought. But if you're only interested in English thought and you're not interested in translating, then the fact that you can speak Japanese might just not matter to you. And actually, I just remember that my dad is actually kind of like this. My dad grew up in Canada, and he was sent to this immersion school to learn French when he was in grade school. And so by the time he graduated high school, he was totally fluent in French. But as soon as he went on to college, he pretty much never used French again and ended up, for the most part, completely forgetting it. And today he can hardly speak a word of French. And I asked him if he had any regrets about this. And he said no, because he doesn't give a crap about French. Everything he wants to do is in English. He lives in the United States. He's not interested in France. He feels no reason to read books in 2 languages, because every book he wants to read is already in English. And I can totally understand that. It's completely pragmatic. Part of me felt weird about that, because I was like, well, I'm a language learner. I think it's so cool to be bilingual and speak 2 languages. And the fact that you pretty much got French for free but then threw it out feels like such a waste to me. But that's because I've already adopted this whole paradigm where having language ability is inherently good. And this is a paradigm that I bought into through reading the AJAT website and hanging out with other language learners and trying so hard to get good at a language myself. But really, to a lot of people, foreign language ability doesn't really matter that much. So again, it all depends on your own goals and what you care about. So yeah, if you're learning a language because it's going to afford you more financial opportunities, like let's say that you are like some really poor Chinese farmer and you learn English so you can immigrate to the United States and make sure that your kids have better opportunities, then it's probably a good use of time, whether or not you are that interested in American culture or the English language or whatever. You're doing that for your family. And if you are an American person who speaks English, but you're just very passionate about the Japanese language and you just feel in your heart that learning Japanese and going to Japan is what you want to do, then you'll probably be glad that you did that and not feel that it'll be a waste of time if you are like genuinely passionate about Japanese. And so, yeah, that's great. I guess, the only real like bad use of time, I guess, would probably be that I could say in a more generic sort of sense, because I already went over how really what does bad even mean in the first place. But I mean, I would say that yeah, if you're basically only continuing to learn a language due to sunk cost bias, in some cases maybe you could say that's a bad use of time. There might be other cases where it actually is a good use of time because you're almost fluent, and if you can just make it to fluency, then you can pass some test and put that on your resume, and then that will give you more opportunities in the future, so therefore it's worth it. So I'm not saying that it's always such a bad thing to only be doing it because you've already came so far, but I think a lot of times maybe, I mean, just due to the nature of how learning a language takes so long, it takes like 5 years to get really, really good in a language like Japanese or Chinese, assuming that you're either European or North American. So, 5 years is a long time, and you can change a lot in 5 years. So it's not surprising that if someone who started learning Japanese when they're 20, by the time that they're 25, they're a completely different person with different interests and a different outlook on the world, that maybe they're not that interested in Japan anymore. That's totally understandable and probably happens all the time. And so for that person, maybe, probably continuing to pursue Japanese just because that's what they did in their early 20s, even though it's not really where their heart is, that would probably be a bad use of time, I would think. So Reisu asks, what are the limits of your Japanese ability besides pronunciation and pitch accent? This is kind of a vague question too, because like I have limitations in English, right? Generally, you might not think about native language speakers' ability like that, but yeah, I mean, my writing ability has a limit. I couldn't write a award-winning novel, so that's a limit in my English ability, right? Sometimes when I'm watching British TV shows, I have to turn on the subtitles because the accent's so different that I can't catch exactly what they're saying. That's a limitation of my English ability. Sometimes even just talking to other American people who grew up in the same place that I did, I still have to say, what? Because I didn't quite make out what they said. Oftentimes I make grammatical mistakes, as I always notice when I'm watching back recordings of myself speaking. I pronounce words wrong. I will just have I'll have a really difficult time finding a good way to articulate what I want to say. I'll stop a sentence midway through and then restart it and break the flow of my speech, like I've already done many, many times in this video. And so, and then even like with reading, like if there's an older book, it's going to be really hard for me to read. I might not know a lot of the words. Reading philosophical texts is really difficult for me, even in English. And so there's plenty of limitations in my English. I mean, necessarily, no matter how good you are, there's always going to be limitations somewhere, right? No one has unlimited language ability because no one has an unlimited brain. We all have a limited human brain. So, of course, there's going to be a limit somewhere. And so from that perspective, yeah, of course, there's any number of limits to my Japanese ability. Generally, my English ability is better than my Japanese ability. So I would say that I probably make a little bit more grammar mistakes when I'm just speaking off the cuff when I'm speaking Japanese than when I speak English. I probably have to, restart my sentences midway through more often. And I probably just use words unnaturally more often. I mean, I know it happens even in English when I just can't really find the right word, or maybe I just learned a word wrong, and so I'll use a word in an unnatural way. I think that probably happens more in Japanese. And then you said besides pronunciation related things, so I guess I won't talk about that. And when speaking, if I were to try to talk in Japanese about a topic that I haven't really heard Japanese people talk that much about, then I'm probably going to struggle because I'm not going to know how to talk about that thing in Japanese. Like in the past, I've used the example of meditation, where I've listened to hundreds of hours of, meditation related audiobooks and podcasts and things like that in English. And so I'm quite comfortable talking about different concepts related to meditation in English. But I've heard almost no Japanese people talk about meditation. And so when I try to explain meditation to Japanese people, I really struggle because I don't know what words to use for like awareness and different types of consciousness and mindfulness and these things like that. And so I end up having to kind of like make up new Japanese as I go. And it's normally pretty bumpy and pretty difficult. So that happens. And that happens with any topic that I don't know that much about. Like even if I were going to talk about math, I haven't really studied math in Japanese, so it would probably be really difficult for me, and I would end up making a lot of mistakes or using words really unnaturally because I don't know how to naturally speak about math in Japanese because I haven't listened to Japanese people talk about math in Japanese. And so there's many topics that I haven't read about or listened to in Japanese, so I don't know how Japanese people talk about them. So of course, I'm going to be limited in my ability to talk about any of those topics. And there's a lot of just little holes in my knowledge, like there's many plants that I don't know the name of, or flowers that I don't know the name of, or types of birds that it's like I could see the name and know like, oh, that's a type of bird, but I don't really know what type of bird that is. And there's a lot of just little things like this that a Japanese person might know that I don't. And with reading, most things written within the last 80 years are no problem. For things that are older than 80 years old, then it starts to get harder, and I'll have to probably use a dictionary to read them. It'll probably take me a lot longer. I'll have to go a lot slower. And once you pass the 200-year mark, I pretty much can't read those things. So anything that's older than 200 years, I couldn't really read without basically looking up every other word and going really slowly and thinking about it a lot, because I'm not good enough at classical Japanese to do that. And yeah, so those are some limitations. In general, I'd say using Japanese takes more effort than speaking English does. Speaking English isn't actually entirely effortless. Like, it's definitely very effortful for me to be filming this video right now, and I'm doing my best to sound articulate and coherent and speak smoothly, although don't always do a very good job of it. And so it's not like English is totally effortless. It's definitely not. But I'd say Japanese takes more effort for me to speak in general. Of course, also depends on the topic and how much I'm caring about sounding good and so on. And I probably get tired more quickly in Japanese. Like, I could speak for 3 hours in English without getting really tired, but I can only speak for like 1 hour or an hour and a half in Japanese without getting tired, let's say. Haven't really timed it, so I don't know. But yeah, those are some limitations. I could go into other things further, but the question was pretty vague, so I guess I'll just leave it at that. So Greg asks, I wanted to ask you about how you went about sentence mining from TV shows. I know you've talked about it before in a few videos, and I was rewatching those videos again. You suggested watching a show with the subtitle file on hand to reference if you think you found an I+1 sentence. You also suggested making use of subs to SRS as well. More out of curiosity, I wondered which method you used the most. Did you prefer to use subs to SRS most of the time? Or did you prefer to watch things once in a kind of sentence mining mode and stop to check the subtitle file if there was something you thought could be good? Or did you do a bit of both? I'm starting to try out the watching it once with subs file on hand and stopping to check approach. Since recently, a lot of the episodes of shows I watch don't have that many I+1 sentences, watching it again via a subs to SRS deck feels like a chunk of time that could be better spent. I've been doing the process that Brit vs. Japan suggested, using subs to SRS. Don't know if that is the same way you used it. Okay, so when I was actually sentence mining back in the day when I was initially learning Japanese, I kept things very simple. So I almost never used subs to SRS for making Anki decks. I used subs to SRS to extract the audio out of the shows that I'd watched and put those audio files on my iPod for passive immersion. I would do that, but I never actually made subs to SRS decks and put those into Anki. So what I would do is, I think initially I would just watch anime with subtitles and I'd keep the subtitles on the entire time. And then when I saw a one target sentence, that's the new name for I+1. We're calling them 1T or one target sentences. When I'd find a 1T sentence, I would then open up the subtitle file, find that sentence, because I was normally watching things in VLC, and in VLC you can't copy and paste from subtitle files. And then I'd paste that sentence into a text file. And then later on, when it would be sentence card making time, I would go through my text file and make Anki cards for them. I'd put the sentence on the front, look up the target word, put the definition on the back, and I'd make all the cards in one sitting. So this is generally what I did. And so my cards did not have any audio on them. Now, ideally, your cards would have audio on them, but I was pretty fine with no audio on my cards just because I did a lot of listening anyway, so I got plenty of exposure to the words that I was learning in audio form. Now, I think the reason I didn't use subs to SRS is because I would be watching many episodes from many shows each day, and so I might only take like 1 or 2 or 3 sentences from any one episode. Now, that's not to say that there weren't more I+1 sentences per episode, but I was just ignoring a lot of the I+1 sentences and only focusing on the really juicy ones. I just realized I was saying I+1 sentences because now they're like both in my head, but 1T sentences. So it didn't really feel like a good use of time to go out of my way to make a subs to SRS deck just to get audio for the 2 or 3 sentences that I'd be taking per episode. And back then I wasn't really thinking that deeply about the language learning process, so it wasn't really on my radar that having audio would be a really important thing, because I was mostly just trying to apply the AJAT method, and it seemed like Katsumoto never had audio on his cards, so I didn't really think it would be that much of a big deal. But going back, I might have taken a pretty different approach, but your question is mainly about what did I actually do, so I'm just going to focus on that for now. So that was what I did in the beginning, and then later on, I would mostly just sentence mine from books, and I would just watch without subs, and I wouldn't really mine from shows. Now, I would sometimes, be watching a show, and I'd hear a word that I didn't know, and I'd look it up on my phone just with my ear. I'd just try to sound it out. And if I thought that I found it, then I might just add that word to the text file of all the sentences that I was going to make cards for. And then later on, I'd either use Google or is it Nabun.jp? Well, one of those websites that just give you a lot of different example sentences, and I'd make a sentence card through that. But I would mainly be making sentence cards through books. And for some more difficult shows, like I think I did this for Fate Zero and for Psychopaths, where there was more unknown words coming up in an anime. Then I would do the thing where I would have the subtitle file on hand and I'd watch it without subs. But when I thought I heard something, then I would turn on the subs, and then maybe if I wanted to make a card for that, I'd copy it out of the text file. So yeah, that was all I did. Like super simple. I would in the beginning I would watch with subs, but once I got more advanced, I'd try to watch raw and then just refer to the subtitle file when I needed to, and then I just manually make cards back then because there was there's no Anki add-ons. I didn't know about Morphman. I wasn't that into subs to SRS. There weren't any pre-made subs to SRS decks I could easily download, so it would have been a lot of work to try to do all that manually, and the value of audio wasn't even really on my radar. So yeah, I was pretty much just I never really had a sentence mining mode. I was always on the lookout for new words whenever I was watching or reading, and if I happened to come across something, I'd add it to my text file, and later I'd go through the text file and make cards for all the stuff on there, and that worked out pretty well for me. So yeah, I'm tempted to go into what I would recommend doing now, but I've definitely already talked about that in other places and stuff. So I'll just leave it at that. But if you have any questions about what I would recommend doing now, then feel free to ask, and I'll answer next time. So Callum asks, hey Matt, you mentioned that people should never really get burned out from immersion because the work is being done from the subconscious mind. But you've also said that the more conscious attention you pay to the immersion, the higher quality the immersion will be. So wouldn't the many hours of trying to pay attention and trying to understand as much as you can to your immersion be using mental effort that could lead to burnout? Active immersion is definitely something that causes my brain to tire, so am I going about it in the wrong way? One sec. Super thirsty. So I definitely think it's true that the more you're honing in and paying attention to your active immersion, then the more that's going to benefit you, especially when you're at higher levels and you're starting to plateau in the benefit you get just from immersing. Then it's really up to you to pay attention to your weak spots and really absorb those through honing in on them. And yeah, definitely if you're constantly straining yourself and really paying a lot of attention, that can definitely lead to getting tired. I don't know if burnout is the wrong way, because when I hear burnout, I think of like you just get so fed up with the whole process that you just chuck it out the window and don't do anything for a while. So that's a different story. I think it sounds more like you're talking about just getting tired out. And so like getting exhausted. And so, yeah, I think definitely if you're constantly trying to force yourself to pay as much attention as possible, yeah, you'll kind of deplete your mental energy and become exhausted. And so I think it's a matter of consciously moderating how much energy you're paying to your immersion and just making sure that you give yourself breaks and you're basically only paying attention with as much energy as you have. So you have to respect your energy levels. So when you have more energy and you're naturally more motivated, then pay more attention. And when you're more tired and when you don't have as much energy, then pay less attention. And you should never be pushing yourself very hard. You should be kind of pushing yourself a little bit, but not very much, just like a little bit, so that you're constantly, growing your capacity to pay attention and you're really picking up as much as you can, but you don't want to be straining because, yeah, you don't want to just completely use up your mental energy so that you can't immerse anymore. So it's really just about developing the skill of moderating your energy levels and paying as much attention as you can according to however much energy you have in that moment, and learning how much pushing is going to be productive and how much is just going to be using up your energy so that you don't have any left to immerse later. So yeah, it's kind of about just being conscious of your own mind and body and learning to work with yourself in the most efficient way possible. So Kamazotes asks, do you think you'll ever become a digital nomad, or are you happy living in the United States? I don't know. I mean, I'm definitely happy living in the United States. I mean, I don't really follow politics very closely, and I am sure there's a lot of political stuff going on that I wouldn't approve of, but honestly, I don't think it affects me very much in my day-to-day life. I mean, I have to pay taxes, and that kind of sucks, but I don't really think there's nothing in my day-to-day life that I'm dissatisfied with that I think would be that much different if I was living somewhere else. And so, yeah, I don't really have any strong motivation to get out of the country and go somewhere else. I think there's actually a lot of really cool things about living in the United States, particularly the part of the United States that I live in, which is Portland, Oregon, because, like, for example, I have a lot of meditation friends who are very similar to me. We share a lot of interests. We both are into really hardcore meditation and go on meditation retreats. We also like psychedelics, and it's pretty easy to get psychedelics here. And so in that sense, I think it's really cool. And I think if I was in Japan, for example, or Thailand or Argentina or something, it would be really difficult for me to find real life friends who I connect with and have as many shared interests with as I do here. And so just that abundance of like-minded people, I think, is one of the coolest things about living where I live. And I really like that. And there's also just an atmosphere of the place where I live of acceptance and being kind of non-judgmental to a certain extent. I mean, of course, we're all judgmental. And of course, if you still go out in public and do weird stuff that makes people uncomfortable, you're still going to get nasty looks. But overall, I think there's less pressure to conform in the place where I live than in other places in the United States and in other countries around the world. And I like that. And so, yeah, I definitely don't feel any pressure to leave. There's nothing immediate that makes me dissatisfied. But I think it would be cool to live in other places. And of course, I think about living in Japan because I speak Japanese, so I think I could probably have a pretty fun time in Japan. I also think about like living in Taiwan. Maybe that would be fun for a period of time. Or maybe even somewhere in Europe, like in Norway or something, could be cool. So yeah, maybe perhaps one day, but I don't really know. And so, yeah, I mean, I just got my own place and I have a lease, so I'm probably going to be here for at least a year. And I'm not really thinking that much into the future because who knows where I'll be at in a year from now. My life could be totally different. So Will asks, if we feel like we are at a standstill on whether or not we are progressing or not, what should we do? I feel like I'm learning something every day, but I'm still struggling. So the reason why I'm having such a hard time reading the questions is because the wires to my camera are on top of my computer screen. And so I'm like seeing different parts of the question with each of my eyes, and it's kind of trippy. And also that question had a huge typo in it. But so what do we do if we feel so what should you do if you feel like you're at a plateau and you're not making progress, you're saying? You say you feel like you're learning every day, but you're still struggling. Well, what are you struggling with? Are you struggling like to understand what's going on? Because if so, that's gonna keep happening for a while. There's nothing really you can do about that immediately. But if you're struggling in the sense of you are experiencing negative emotions because you think that your experience should be other than it is, then just stop struggling and accept whatever is going on now, because wherever you are at in the language learning process, that's where you're at. And wishing that you were further to fluency or feeling like you're not moving fast enough or whatever, like that's just going to psych you out and make you feel negative emotions, and it's not really going to be productive. So first thing I'd say is just chill out. Feeling like your progress is slow and that you've kind of hit a plateau is a normal part of the learning process that everyone's going to go through many times on their way to fluency. So I mean, the real solution to this is to take a meta perspective and learn that feeling like you're not making progress is part of the language learning process. And oftentimes you are making a lot of progress, even when you're feeling that you're not. And so you can't really trust that feeling. It can be misleading and it can be harmful. So you gotta kind of go meta on your emotions and your thoughts and have more faith in the process, or just be more objective. Right? Try to be more objective. What are you doing each day? How many minutes are you spending with your target language? How many words are you learning in the SRS? And try to think objectively. Get some statistics, because if you are spending a few hours every day with your target language and you're learning at least 10 words in the SRS every day, then I guarantee it, you're getting better. That's how it works. You can't not get better if you're learning 10 words every day and you're doing active immersion for 2+ hours. So you're getting better. It's really just like a mindset issue, an expectations issue. And a lot of the reason why this happens is that if you ask a beginner in a language how much they understand of a given show, they might say like, oh, I understand 20% or 30%. But really, there's no way for them to know whether they're truly understanding 20%, because in order to know how much you're understanding, that necessarily implies that you know how much you're not understanding. But how can you know how much you're not understanding if you're not understanding it, right? So really, a lot of times when people have this subjective sense of roughly how well they're doing, how much they're understanding, that's entirely off, because they are underestimating how much they're actually not understanding. They're just focusing on the little bits that they are, and they're like, oh, this seems like probably 20% of the whole. But they have no idea how big the whole is, because you literally cannot perceive what you can't understand. So basically what happens is, as you get better, your subjective sense of how much you're not understanding gets more accurate. So let's say that at a certain point in the process, you feel like you understand about 30% of whatever you tend to immerse with, and therefore you don't understand around 70%. Now, of course, in reality, this percentage is going to be fluctuating all over the place, depending on what exactly you're immersing with, what the day is, what your mood is, and so on. That's another just normal part of the language learning process. Is it's not linear at all. It goes all over the place with steadily rising on average over time. But anyway, let's just say in general, you understand about 30%, you think, based off your subjective perception, and so therefore you're not understanding 70%. Now, this is what you might feel, but in reality, you might be understanding 10% and not understanding 90%. So this 10% that you were understanding, you were basically overestimating how significant it was, and you thought that 10% was actually 30%. And you thought that the 90% you weren't understanding was only 70%. So what's going to happen is, so remember, you're understanding 30, you're understanding 10%, but you're feeling like you're understanding 30. So let's say that you get better, and your perception so basically you understand more, and your perception of how much you don't understand gets clearer. So now let's say in reality you're understanding 15%, and you're only not understanding 85%. But subjectively, you now feel like you're understanding 20% and not understanding 80%. So in reality, your ability went up, but subjectively you feel like you got worse, because before it used to feel like you were understanding 30, now it only feels like you're understanding 20. In reality, before you were understanding 10, and now you're understanding 15, so you made progress, but subjectively you feel like you got worse, because it feels like the percentage of the whole that you understand either didn't change or perhaps even shrunk. And this is just because your perception is getting more accurate as you get better. And a lot of times you'll have a jump in ability, and what will come with that jump in ability is, like, sometimes what will happen is you'll notice that you're understanding more. And then you guys have probably all had the experience of waking up one day, you start immersing, and it just suddenly occurs to you like, whoa, I understand a lot of this. Like, this is working. I'm getting pretty good. I'm pretty good at this. And then another day you'll wake up and suddenly you're like, wait, what the heck? I don't understand anything. What's wrong with me? Like, is my brain broken? And did I get some neurological disease? What's wrong with me? Do I suck? Maybe I'm never going to get good. And what happens is sometimes when you make a jump in ability, that jump is reflected to you as a jump in your understanding, but sometimes it's reflected in a more accurate depiction of how much you're not understanding. Because before you were delusional about how much you were missing, and now you start to see the picture, oh, I'm actually missing a lot. So basically this all comes to say that your perception as a language learner is probably going to be pretty different from the reality, and because of this, as you get better and your perception changes, that can feel like progress or like you're actually getting worse, but it's probably all progress, because if you're learning words every day and you're getting immersion every day, there's really no logic for you to get worse. The only situation in which you're going to get worse is when you actually massively drop your exposure to the language and you start literally forgetting. So as long as you're actually doing stuff every day, you probably are getting better. And the skill I can tell you that you should cultivate this skill, but in reality, it's just going to be something that comes about naturally as you continue to go through these cycles. But what's going to happen is you're going to start being able to go meta on the ups and downs of your subjective experience. And so when you get really good when you wake up in the morning one day and you feel like, whoa, I'm really good, you're going to know in the back of your mind, yeah, but probably in 2 weeks from now, I'm going to feel like I suck again. And then in 2 weeks, when you wake up and you feel like you suck, then you're going to know, oh, yep, I knew this was going to happen. This is normal. Probably in 2 weeks, I'm going to feel like I'm really good again. And therefore, you don't really get tugged as strongly in each direction emotionally because you kind of just know that that's how the process plays out. And there'll definitely be long stretches where it almost does just feel like a standstill, maybe not up or down, especially in the intermediate phase, because that's when you start to really experience the diminishing returns when it comes to learning vocabulary, because now you're learning words that are less commonly used. And so the value of learning 100 words is a lot less than it was before. And so maybe if you're not feeling the same progress you used to feel. But that, again, is just something that you have to calibrate your mind to, because, progress feels different at different stages. And the fact that you're getting better is not going to change. So one thing you can do if you want to be able to judge your progress or feel your progress more clearly is decide on a certain piece of media or a YouTube video in your target language and continually come back to that same exact video. Because if it's the same video, you're going to be able to tell when you're understanding more than you were previously. And so this can be more of an objective measure for you to really judge your progress or not. And if you do this and you're actually immersing and learning words, then you'll consistently find that you're understanding more each time, and then you'll know that you're getting better. So yeah, in conclusion, it's as long as you're doing the right things, then it's probably just in your head. And you basically, like, language learning is largely a psychological battle. And learning these psychological skills of not taking your thoughts and emotions that seriously, being able to go meta, kind of see yourself from the third person perspective and be more objective, is really crucial for long-term success. And so I try to recontextualize your problem as not an actual problem, but as a psychological problem. And then maybe you can start getting more, making more progress on your meta problem. So Reisu asks, have you ever had trouble interacting with groups of Japanese people? For example, understanding what everyone is saying, but the speed of the conversation is moving so fast that there's no space for you to say anything. Or for example, understanding 99% but missing a few words which cause you to lose track of the conversation. If so, what did you do to push past this phase? The most obvious way to improve is to continue to hang out with groups of Japanese people, but this is difficult as well because you're unlikely to be invited next time if you didn't add anything to the group. So yeah, I've definitely experienced this. When I was in college, I had a lot of experiences that sound very similar to what you're describing. I think it's just pretty inevitable for people to go through that phase on, as they continue to get more and more fluent in a target language. It's just, there's something about group conversations between native speakers that is just really hard to understand. And I think it's because when a single person is talking, there is a certain logic to whatever they're saying. And so you can kind of follow the thread of the thought. And even if you miss one thing here or there, because the thought, you still know the general direction that the thought is going in, your brain can easily fill in the blanks of what you missed. But in a group conversation, it's not a straight line. It's like, the thread of the conversation is constantly going in different directions. And so if you miss one little line, it's really hard for your brain to catch up and fill in the blank, right? It's like one little loss, and now you might be out for like 5 minutes because that one little piece you missed was needed as context for all the other things that were said, and you can't catch up, essentially. So basically, there's a smaller margin of, you need to have a smaller margin of error in order to succeed. And so ultimately, I think it just comes down to having better listening ability in the language. That's really just what it comes down to, because if you are really used to just watching TV shows that have this narrative thread, or watching monologues on YouTube or podcasts or whatever, then you might get the illusion that you're better than you really are, because you're still missing stuff, but your brain's able to fill in the blanks, right? So then you go to a group conversation, and then it feels like, oh, suddenly I can't follow along everything. I can get close, but I'm just not quite there. And that's really revealing to you the true extent of your listening ability, and it more highlights that you might not be as good as you thought you were. And so the solution is to just get better at listening ability, get better listening skills ultimately, and that will mostly solve your problem. And so for me, like, I watched a lot of Terrace House, because Terrace House, like, basically, yeah, you say the most obvious example is continuing to participate in groups of Japanese people. But the thing is, if your problem is that you're understanding 99% of the conversation, but you need to be understanding 100, then you don't need to be there, right? You can just get recordings of groups of Japanese people talking and practice with that. It's not really important that you're physically present. And so, yeah, you can watch a lot of Terrace House. That's what I did. I also just tried to seek out more, just watch more Manzai. I think that helped me, because Manzai is two different people interacting. And it also has a similar nature where if you miss out on even one word that was said, you might be totally lost for the rest of the video. And so, yeah, just try to find things that emulate group conversation, or just present the weaknesses that you have that are causing you to fail for group conversation. And so, yeah, like watching Manzai, watching more YouTube videos that had multiple people in them talking, and watching Terrace House. And I also did Skype Channel a lot. Skype Channel is this website where random Japanese people who want to talk to each other post their Skype address, and if you add one of these people, then they do like group calls. So if you can go on the website, look at all the different Japanese people who are posting their Skype address, and some of them say, hey, we're doing a group call, and then you can message them and say, hey, please add me to your group call, and then you can just get added. And it's pretty easy to just be silent and just listen, and you can get added to a new group call every day if you want to, with different people. And so your track record doesn't really matter. And now there's also Discord servers for Japanese people, where you can just go into a Discord like voice channel with 5 Japanese people and just listen to them talk. And so, yeah, that's also a good way to just practice following off the cuff conversation between multiple Japanese people. And once you get to the point where you can effortlessly, oh, by the way, also you can do VR chat. That's something that I tried recently. There's a lot of Japanese people who play VR chat, and that's another way to hear groups of Japanese people talk to each other. So, so basically I would recommend finding one of these situations where you can get a lot of listening practice, and there's not the pressure for you that you have to participate. And through this, bump up your listening ability, get it to the point where following group conversation is very easy for you. And then and also those situations like the Discord, the Skype, and the VR chat, they also present you with opportunities to speak if you want to. And so I think those are just good places to practice, because it's easier to fail, so to speak. Because, yeah, the stakes are really high if you're in real life and you're with especially if you're not in Japan, then there might only be one group of Japanese people that you have access to. And so, yeah, if they end up thinking that you're awkward and then they don't want to hang out with you anymore, then you're screwed, because now there's not an alternate group of Japanese people you can go to. And so the stakes become really high. This probably makes you feel a lot of stress and anxiety, and that makes it even harder to perform well, and it's just not very ideal for practice. And so, yeah, I think finding one of these online situations where you have an avatar, there's an unlimited number of groups of people. So if you embarrass yourself with one group, you can just go find another group. And so the stakes are really low. There's ample opportunity for practice. I think those are the type of situations that you just want to start regularly participating in. And through that, you can get better and better at Japanese social dynamics. So yeah, I would say it's mostly just the listening ability, I think. And so there's that. But then, of course, there's some aspect of just, acquiring the social dynamics of Japanese people. And yeah, you definitely need to hear Japanese conversation in particular to pick up on that. And so there's that. And then, of course, there's the actual aspect of you need to practice to get good. But ultimately, I think it's more just internalizing the social dynamics rather than it actually takes practice to get good. So I think it's like A, understand what they're saying, B, acquire the social dynamics, and then if you have that down very quickly, you'll be able to figure out how to participate yourself. So, yeah. So Robert Wicktaker asks, this may have been answered before, but how did you and Yoga meet? So Yoga came into my Discord server, and that's where we met. I think Yoga found out about my Discord server because he had this other friend who used to, I think, go on like 4chan, and he was kind of like just memeing. He wasn't even that serious about learning Japanese. And he found my channel somehow, and he went in my Discord server, and he was like kind of trolling, I think. And then he told Yoga about me and said, oh yeah, there's this guy, he thinks he's super good at Japanese, he like went super hard on Anki. And I think that got Yoga's, it made Yoga interested, because Yoga, was a very hardcore language learner, and he hadn't interacted with that many people who were as hardcore about language learning as him. And so I think he was interested, like, oh, maybe this guy's legit, I should go check him out, because most people who try to talk about language learning are full of shit. So it'd be cool if this guy was actually legit. So we came in and we started talking, and I remember he was asking me, he was like trying to test how good it was. He was like, how many kanji can you write out? And like all this other stuff. And I remember just thinking like, oh, you're so annoying, because people who, honestly, it's kind of annoying when people are constantly trying to verify my Japanese ability and gauge my Japanese ability. So at first, I think I just thought of him as being annoying. But then we were like, and then we just kind of DM'd back and forth a little bit. And back then his name was Yoga Pants, and his picture, his avatar was of just a butt, like a girl's butt wearing yoga pants. So that also, and I mean, the reason why it was that was because this was just Yoga's meme account. I think normally he was using that just to troll other servers and do stuff like that, just mess around and have fun basically and play video games. So he didn't realize that he was going to actually have serious conversations with me, I think. And so otherwise he would have had a different username and a different avatar. But yeah, he had the Yoga Pants avatar. And so that also like made me not take him very seriously at first. And I just thought, I assumed he was just some other annoying person who I wouldn't really be interested in. And so I wasn't even taking that seriously. But one day then we video called, because he was like, hey, we should talk. And I was like, okay. And then we video called for like 6 hours, and he just told me the whole story of his life. And I was super intrigued. And then after that, we were like actually friends. So yeah, that's the story. Not very climactic, but let's see. I didn't answer that many questions, but I'm already 50 minutes in because I take way too much time to answer questions. James McCormick asks, how would you recommend getting the most out of language lessons with a native speaker teaching as a stage 1 learner? So just to be real with you, if you're in stage 1 of MIA, there's nothing that a language teacher can actually do for you that's going to be useful. That's just the reality. Our language teachers don't really become useful until you're seriously outputting and you're looking to get feedback on what type of mistakes you're making. That is really when native speaker teachers become useful. And if you want to know exactly how to use native speaker teachers, watch my newest video, why native speaker teachers, or don't listen to language learning advice from native speakers. I don't even remember what it's called. But yeah, something like that on the channel. I go into that. If you're in stage 1, native speaker tutors can be useful for motivation, because some people just get a lot of motivation from interacting with speakers of their target language, even if the conversation is very broken and very simple. The fact that they are communicating in any shape or form is very inspiring to them. And I totally get this, because I've spoken like very broken Chinese to waiters at restaurants a few times, and it definitely does feel super cool and motivating. So that is probably realistically the best thing that native speaker teachers are useful for in the beginning. But realistically, what are you doing in stage 1? Well, first of all, you're learning the kanji through recognition RTK. You don't need a native speaker for that at all. All you need to do is read the instructions and get the deck and start studying. Then you're learning basic vocabulary. You definitely don't need a native teacher for that, because all you're doing is memorizing sentences through an Anki deck. And so all you have to do is read the instructions and get the Anki deck. Learning basic grammar, you don't need a native speaker teacher to explain that to you. You can just read a textbook. And then you're doing lots of listening to help you, to help your ear start to learn to parse the sound system and hear words in the language. And you don't need a native speaker teacher for that as long as you have internet access, because there is close to an infinite amount of Japanese content that you can listen to, or not Japanese content. I guess I'm assuming, well, yeah, you say you're learning Japanese in the, in your question, this person asked a question and then they commented on their question with more details. And so in that, they talked about how they're learning Japanese, but pretty much no matter what language you're learning, well, that's not true. If you're learning a major language, then there's an unlimited amount of content on the internet. And so you don't need a native speaker for listening practice, right? You can just find TV shows, find movies, find audiobooks. There's already tons of texts with audio along with them. So even if you want to have a basic text with native audio, there's probably an unlimited number of those as well. So there's pretty much anything you could want. Now, if you're learning a very obscure language, like some specific dialect of Arabic or something like that, then maybe native speaker tutors are really useful because there's not an abundance of native content. And so really, your only way to access certain parts of the language is through real live people or real life people across the internet. So in that case, my answer would totally change. But you're talking about Japanese. And so in this case, if you're in stage 1, the only thing that a native speaker tutor can realistically do for you is motivate you. And if it does, if talking to the native speaker teacher motivates you, then that's great. Keep doing it, as long as you don't do it too much. And besides that, there's nothing she can really do for you, because the stuff you need to do to get good in stage 1 is stuff that only you can do and doesn't require another person. So Jackson Hardy asks, how do Japanese people pronounce question mark or exclamation point? And then he has this example sentence in Japanese that says, 顔にハテナをかけていた, which basically means like, she had a question mark on her face. And I just said it as hatena, but that is like question mark. And so question mark, there's a few different names for it. One of them is gimonfu, and I'll put these in the description. Gimonfu it's like all in kanji. It literally means like question or doubting mark. And the more common colloquial word is hatena maku. So hatena is kind of just a word that just means like hatena, like And so that, and then maku, which is just mark in katakana, that's like the more common way to just say question mark. Like if you were talking about writing a sentence and you were like at a question mark, you would be like hatena maku tsukete. But if you're talking about this thing that you sometimes see in light novels and so on, when they're literally like, oh, she had a question mark on her face, and they actually literally write question mark, that I feel like I've heard Japanese people just say like hatena instead of hatena maku. And so I think you can also, so maybe just hatena, and then also some Japanese people might just read that sentence out loud as kao ni like o ukabete ita, and they might just interpret it as like rather than pronouncing it as a word. So and the other thing is that in this particular case, when it's like she had a question mark on her face, there's no official way to read it, because that's not actually how you use the question mark, right? It's like a metaphorical thing. She didn't literally have a question mark on her face. She just looked confused, or looked like she wasn't understanding what was happening. And so this is just a creative usage of the word. It's not the original use of the question mark. And so even between Japanese people, they'd probably interpret it differently how it's used. So like I said, if it's being used in the official way, like it's just how do you refer to this symbol that looks like this, then that's hatena maku. And the dictionary also has question maku, but I've never heard that before. And then the exclamation mark is bikkuri maku. That's the one that I've heard. There might be other names. Actually, I can look it up. So kantanfu is another word. The pitch accent might have been wrong. Oh yeah, kantanfu. So that apparently there's the word kantanfu. That means dictionary. That means exclamation point. It looks like there's also exclamation mark. So there's that, and I've also heard bikkuri mark. So those are the 3 for each one. I'll put them in the description. So, okay, last question. Manuel, I think that's how you read that name, asks, "Hey Matt, simple question. Why are you learning Mandarin? And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but didn't you say that even though you had fun, you learned Japanese for all the wrong reasons and it wasn't worth it? Why spend the time learning another language? Just wondering. Peace." So I definitely think I was learning Japanese for the wrong reasons, because ultimately I was learning Japanese because I felt like a misfit in my own culture and I wanted to be accepted by a group of people. And I thought that learning Japanese would get me that acceptance that I was craving without even really knowing it. So yeah, that's definitely a bad reason to learn a language. But I don't know what I've said in the past, but I don't think that learning Japanese wasn't worth it. I definitely wouldn't say that. It's, a difficult question, because in order to say that something, spending 5 entire years of my life doing nothing but learning Japanese was worth it or not, I'd have to consider all the other things I could do with that time. But I don't regret it. So in that sense, I don't think that I feel that learning Japanese wasn't worth it. So that's pretty different than what you are kind of implying my attitude towards my experience with the Japanese was. But anyway, why am I learning Mandarin? Well, first of all, because it's fun. Learning a language is inherently fun if you have the right mindset and you're engaging with it in the right way and you're a certain type of person. So learning Mandarin is fun. That's why one reason why I continue to do it. I'm also inherently interested in Chinese, and I like the Chinese language. I like Mandarin, and so interacting with it makes me want to know more of it. I'm also doing it because I want to put myself in the position of being a language learner again, because it's already been so long since I learned Japanese that I don't even remember that well what it was actually like to be at the different stages in the language learning process. And so in order to be able to give the best advice to my viewers and really empathize with them, I think it's important that I put myself in their shoes so that I can really give advice from my lived experience. And also, I'm much wiser than I was when I was learning Japanese. And so through engaging in the language learning process now that I've already learned a whole language and I'm just a way smarter person, I have a lot more insights and ideas about how to optimize the language learning process that I never could have had the first time. And I couldn't really have just thinking about language learning. To have certain types of insights, you have to actually be getting your hands dirty and be actually engaged in the activity. You have to be coming up against the problems directly so that your mind can come up with the solutions. And so I definitely feel like it's important for me to be able to run MIA the best that I can for me to be an active language learner. And another piece of that's kind of part of the same thing, is that the language learning process has changed so much in terms of the technology that's available compared to when I was learning a language. And so now, we have subs to SRS, we have Morphman, we have the retirement add-on, we have the MIA Japanese add-on for pitch accent, and just all these other tools. We have Netflix, we have Subadub, and these are all things that we didn't really have. Well, I didn't really have when I was learning Japanese. And so I think it's important that I actually get direct experience using all the latest tools so that I can give tailored advice about how to integrate these tools into the larger language learning process. Because if I just was imagining how these tools could be useful, but I didn't have any experience with them, then I might give really misguided advice. So that's another reason, especially why I think it's important for me to be engaged with the language learning process right now, so that I can be practicing what I preach and making sure that everything I'm saying definitely checks out and works well in my own experience. And so, yeah, I guess that's going to be it for this one. Thanks so much for supporting. You guys are awesome. And if you want some clarification on any of the questions, go ahead and ask that. And even if it doesn't get upvoted, I'll try to maybe just write a text answer to it. And I guess I'll see you guys in the next one.